Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and let our minds drift back to a period in history that, for many, evokes images of fairy tale romance and grand celebrations, but for some, particularly young women, was a terrifying ordeal. The miserable wedding night of a royal princess. You might imagine a joyous union, chosen for love and celebrated with unbridled merriment. But for a royal princess in medieval and early modern Europe, her wedding was almost never about personal feelings. It was a cold, hard political transaction, often with immense stakes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Whether that's a cozy evening in a quiet suburb of San Diego, California, or the early morning hours in a bustling Boston apartment. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself now, a young woman, barely in your teens, perhaps 14 or 15 years old, named Princess Isabella, a daughter of King Louis XIV of France. It's the early 16th century, a time of shifting alliances and fragile peace across Europe. Your days have been spent in the gilded cages of royal palaces, learning languages, music, embroidery, and courtly etiquette. You have been meticulously prepared for one purpose: to be a pawn in the grand chess game of international politics. One crisp autumn morning, a dusty, travel-worn envoy from England arrives at the French court, carrying not a love letter, but a formal proposal of marriage. Not for you, a declaration of affection, but a cold, calculating offer to solidify a peace treaty, to prevent costly wars, to unite dynasties. The prospective groom is King Henry VIII, a man you've never met, rumored to be charismatic and intelligent, but also volatile and demanding, and significantly older than you. The thought sends a shiver down your spine. With a chilling certainty that your entire existence, your very body, is no longer your own. It belongs to the state, to your father's kingdom, to the demands of dynastic survival. This is the stark, unromantic truth of the fateful betrothal politics and personas, where a princess's wedding was a calculated political act, not a love story, set within a lavish yet ultimately constricting environment that stripped her of personal agency. It's like being forced to marry a complete stranger for a massive business deal. But the business deal involves entire countries, and your personal happiness is utterly irrelevant to the quarterly report. For centuries across Europe, royal marriages were rarely, if ever, about love or even personal compatibility. They were powerful tools of diplomacy, designed to forge alliances, secure borders, avert wars, or consolidate power. A royal princess was a valuable commodity, a living embodiment of her father's political aspirations. Her hand in marriage could bring peace to warring nations, unite vast territories, or secure critical financial aid. The betrothal itself, the formal promise to marry, was often a lengthy and complex process. It involved intricate negotiations between kingdoms, conducted by ambassadors, lawyers, and trusted advisors. Every detail was scrutinized: the dowry, the wealth the bride brought to the marriage, the jointure, the land or income the bride would receive for her maintenance if she became a widow, succession rights, religious stipulations, and even clauses regarding potential future children. Imagine a room full of stern-faced men, poring over lengthy Latin documents, debating your future as if you were a piece of property, which, in many ways, you were. A princess's persona was carefully crafted from birth. She was taught multiple languages, often including Latin, French, and the language of her future husband's court. She received instruction in history, geography, music, and dance. She was trained in piety, modesty, and the elaborate rituals of courtly etiquette. Every aspect of her upbringing was designed to prepare her for her ultimate job, as a queen or a duchess, to produce heirs, uphold the honor of her new kingdom, and navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. She was a living symbol, expected to embody grace, virtue, and regal bearing at all times. This intensive preparation was a heavy burden, demanding near perfection from a very young age. A common historical truth is that royal marriages in medieval and early modern Europe were overwhelmingly political alliances, negotiated between ruling families to secure peace, territory, or dynastic advantage, with the personal desires of the royal bride and groom being secondary or entirely irrelevant. The princess, in particular, was a valuable pawn in these high-stakes diplomatic games. Historians still widely debate the precise psychological impact of these arranged marriages on the individuals involved. Given the scarcity of candid personal testimonies from royal brides, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the fateful betrothal politics and personas is the prevalence of marriage by proxy, where, particularly for long-distance royal unions, the wedding ceremony itself might take place with a stand-in for the absent groom, often a trusted nobleman or ambassador, who would literally lie in bed with a sword between himself and the bride as a symbolic consummation before she ever met her actual husband. A chilling prelude to the real wedding night, and a stark demonstration of her body's early conversion into a mere diplomatic instrument. Imagine young Princess Isabella, dressed in her finest silks, standing before an altar in Notre Dame Cathedral, not with her future husband, King Henry, but with a stiff, formal English duke, who represents him. Later, in a bizarre, formalized ritual, this duke would symbolically bed her, lying on a bed with her while witnesses watched, a sword dividing them, meant to signify the legal transfer of her person. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a public declaration that her body was already a political instrument, even before she met the man to whom it was truly pledged. It's like having a legally binding dress rehearsal for your entire future, but the lead actor is a stand-in, and the whole world is watching you pretend. The choice of a marriage partner was rarely left to the princess herself. Her parents, usually the king and queen, along with their advisors, would sift through potential suitors based on political expediency. Factors like the size of a kingdom, its military strength, its strategic location, and the prospective groom's dynastic stability were paramount. Personal attractiveness or charm were, at best, minor considerations. In some cases, a princess might be betrothed in childhood, barely old enough to understand the implications of the arrangements being made for her. Imagine Princess Mary, daughter of King James I of Scotland, betrothed at the age of 6 to the Dauphin of France, living her entire childhood knowing her ultimate destination was a foreign land and a man she barely knew. The prospective groom might also be a complete stranger, or someone only known through portraits, which were often idealized. In an era before photography, these painted likenesses were the only way a future royal couple might meet before their actual wedding day. Imagine the anxiety of seeing a portrait, a painted smile, and knowing that this image, perhaps flattering or entirely misleading, was your only window into the man who would be your husband, your king, and the father of your children. This lack of personal knowledge contributed significantly to the fear and uncertainty surrounding the wedding night. The religious aspect of the betrothal and marriage was also profoundly important. Marriages had to be recognized by the church, and meticulous care was taken to ensure there were no impediments, such as too close a blood relation, which often required papal dispensation, a major diplomatic headache. The legitimacy of future heirs depended entirely on the undisputed validity of the marriage, making canonical legality a central concern for both sides. Despite the formality and political gravity, there was an intense personal struggle for the princess. She was raised in luxury, but also in extreme confinement. Her movements were restricted, her education prescribed, her future predetermined. She had little agency over her own life, let alone her body. The job of a royal princess was to be beautiful, virtuous, and above all, fertile. Her primary function was to produce heirs, especially a male heir, to secure the dynastic line. This expectation hung over her like a suffocating shroud, making the wedding night not just a private moment, but a public examination of her reproductive potential. The betrothal period could last for years, with the princess living in a state of suspended animation, preparing for a future that was both glittering and terrifying. She would practice the language of her future court, study its customs, and perhaps exchange formal, stilted letters with her intended. Every interaction was scrutinized, every move choreographed. There was no room for personal desires or emotional resistance. Her personal persona had to align perfectly with the political persona demanded by her role. So, while the idea of a royal wedding might evoke images of fairy tale romance, the stark reality of the fateful betrothal politics and personas, where a princess's union was a calculated political act, not a love story, set within a lavish yet constrained environment, was the agonizing truth for countless young women. This era reminds us of the profound sacrifices individuals made for the sake of statecraft and dynasty, proving that for centuries, personal agency was a luxury few royals could afford, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of individual choice, the right to marry for love, and the profound freedom to shape our own destinies. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's preordained path to a miserable wedding night, let's gently return from the stark reality of the fateful betrothal, where politics and personas dictated a princess's destiny, reducing her wedding to a cold diplomatic maneuver. If we've just explored the origins of her miserable fate, tonight we'll journey with her through the next terrifying stage journey to the unknown. Departure and peril. You might imagine a swift, luxurious flight, but for your royal ancestor, her journey to the unknown was a slow, arduous, and frequently dangerous undertaking, making her departure and peril a literal, often months-long test of endurance. Imagine yourself. Now, Princess Isabella, the young French princess from Chapter 1, betrothed to King Henry VIII of England. The elaborate proxy wedding, remember that chilling ceremony with the stand-in groom, is finally over. But it's merely a prelude. The true ordeal is about to begin. You stand on the grand steps of the French royal palace, perhaps the magnificent Château de Blois, surrounded by a vast retinue of your own French ladies, guards, and servants. The air is thick with solemnity, not joy. Your parents, the king and queen, embrace you, their faces etched with a mixture of pride, sorrow, and perhaps relief that this crucial alliance is being forged. You glance back at the familiar spires of the palace, the gardens where you played as a child, the faces of your childhood companions all about to become distant memories. Before you stretches a vast, unknown landscape. First, a long, bone-jarring ride across the muddy, bandit-infested roads of France to a port. Then the terrifying prospect of a sea voyage across the unpredictable English Channel. And finally, another long journey through the foreign countryside of England to your new home. Every mile takes you further from everything you know, closer to a man you've never met, and a life entirely dictated by new customs and unfamiliar faces. This is the profound, unsettling truth of Journey to the Unknown, where your departure and peril were not just metaphorical goodbyes, but a months-long test of physical and mental fortitude, fraught with real dangers, all for the sake of a political alliance. It's like a very, very long, very uncomfortable, very dangerous business trip, where the destination is a forced marriage, and your only luggage is your anxiety. Once the betrothal was formalized, the immediate next job of the royal princess was to physically transport herself from her home kingdom to her new one. This was no trivial matter. Depending on the distance, this journey could take weeks, or even months, involving thousands of miles over land and sea. Each leg of the journey presented its own unique set of perils. Travel in medieval and early modern Europe was incredibly arduous. Roads were often little more than muddy tracks, deeply rutted by cartwheels and poorly maintained. Imagine traversing such terrain in a cumbersome, heavy carriage, jostling and swaying for hours on end, day after day. The speed of travel was dictated by the pace of horses and the need for frequent stops for rest, food, and repairs. A royal procession, with its hundreds of carriages, wagons carrying dowry goods and armed guards, moved at a snail's pace, often no more than 10 to 15 miles a day. A common historical truth is that royal journeys for medieval and early modern princesses to their new kingdoms were incredibly long, arduous, and often dangerous undertakings, involving weeks or months of travel by land and sea, exposing them to various perils and demanding significant physical and mental endurance. These extensive processions were a logistical challenge and a major state affair. Historians still widely debate the precise average speed of such royal processions and the specific daily comfort levels experienced by the princesses. Given the general limitations of pre-modern travel, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about this grueling journey to the unknown and the omnipresent threat of departure and peril is the curious ritual of safe conduct negotiations, where, for incredibly high-stakes royal journeys traversing multiple territories, elaborate diplomatic assurances and even royal hostages, often high-ranking nobles or princes, might be exchanged or held by intermediary rulers to guarantee the princess's unmolested passage through their lands, transforming her escort into a complex, multi-layered diplomatic mission where every stop involved subtle political maneuvers to ensure continued safety. Imagine Princess Isabella's massive convoy approaching a border town, not just worried about bandits, but about whether the local count, nominally loyal to France, would actually honor the safe conduct granted by his liege lord, or if he'd try to extract some tribute. Often, a prince from the host country would even travel with the princess as a personal guarantee of safety, literally putting his own body on the line. This wasn't just about avoiding highwaymen, it was about navigating a political minefield where a breach of hospitality could trigger a war. It's like planning a cross-country road trip, but every state line requires a formal treaty and a temporary hostage exchange. Banditry and lawlessness were constant threats, particularly on isolated roads or through dense forests, a familiar danger for our outsiders and outlaws from Chapter 8. While a royal procession would be heavily guarded by armed soldiers, the sheer size and conspicuousness of the entourage made it a tempting target for opportunistic thieves or even disgruntled local lords. Imagine your carriage jolting to a halt, the sudden shouts of guards, the clang of steel as a skirmish erupts somewhere ahead, and you, a terrified princess, huddled inside, praying for safety. This was not a romantic adventure, it was a constant state of vigilance. Weather was another unpredictable and formidable foe. Heavy rains could turn roads into impassable quagmires, delaying the journey for days or weeks. Snow and ice in winter made travel treacherous, risking overturned carriages and frostbite. Summer heat could lead to exhaustion and dehydration. Imagine your fine gowns ruined by mud, your skin chafed by constant dampness, your temper fraying under the relentless discomfort. The elements paid no heed to your royal status. The sea voyage, particularly across the English Channel, was often the most feared part of the journey. Medieval ships were small, unhygienic, and vulnerable to storms. Seasickness was rampant, a gentler echo of the pervasive sickness on the seas that plagued galley slaves in Chapter 5. Imagine the terrifying sensation of being tossed about on rough waves, the stench of unwashed bodies and stale food filling the cramped cabins, the constant fear of shipwreck. For many, this was their first, and most likely only, experience of sea travel, and it was rarely a pleasant one. It truly sucked to be seasick for days on end with no proper remedies. Beyond the physical discomfort and danger, there was the profound psychological toll of leaving everything familiar behind. You were departing your home, your family, your language, and your culture. You were venturing into an unknown land where customs might be alien, and even your new family might view you with suspicion or disdain. Imagine the crushing loneliness as the familiar coastline receded, replaced by the vast, indifferent ocean. There was no FaceTime, no easy way to call home. Your connection to your past life was severed, leaving you adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The job of her ladies-in-waiting, often companions from her childhood, a less glamorous version of serving the nobility from Chapter 6, was to provide comfort and familiarity. But even they were stepping into the unknown alongside her. Their presence offered a small measure of solace, but they too were at the mercy of the journey and the new court. Upon arrival at the border of her new kingdom, the journey was far from over. There would often be elaborate welcome ceremonies, formal receptions by local nobles, and perhaps even a carefully orchestrated first meeting with her future husband. Each of these events, while seemingly grand, added another layer of pressure. You had to present yourself perfectly. Despite the exhaustion and anxieties of the journey, every gesture and every smile and every word was observed and judged, setting the tone for your future reception at court. So, while the idea of a royal bride's journey might seem like a triumphant procession, the grim reality of Journey to the Unknown, where her departure and peril were a slow, arduous, and frequently dangerous undertaking, was a profound aspect of her pre-wedding ordeal. This era reminds us of the immense challenges of travel in a pre-modern world, and the physical and emotional resilience required of those who embarked on such pivotal diplomatic missions, proving that for centuries, the path to a royal marriage was fraught with genuine peril, leaving us truly grateful for modern transportation, instant communication, and the freedom to travel safely. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's terrifying journey to her miserable wedding night, let's gently return from the perilous journey of departure and peril, where our young princess faced the physical and psychological toll of Journey to the Unknown. If we've just navigated the arduous path to her new kingdom, tonight we'll witness the culmination of that journey, arrival, and scrutiny. Public display, private fear. You might imagine a moment of quiet relief, but for your royal ancestor, her arrival and scrutiny were an intense, choreographed public display, masking a profound, often overwhelming, private fear. Imagine yourself now. Princess Isabella, having survived the grueling sea voyage across the English Channel, stepping onto English soil, perhaps at Dover, in the bleak midwinter of 1515. Or maybe you are Catherine of Aragon, arriving years earlier, in a grander procession to Plymouth. The damp air bites at your face, but you are barely aware of the cold. Before you stretches a veritable ocean of faces, thousands of common folk, local dignitaries, and curious onlookers, all straining to catch a glimpse of you. You are exhausted, perhaps a bit seasick, a lingering echo from the sickness on the seas we've discussed. Yet you must appear radiant, poised, and utterly composed. Every movement, every gesture, every nuance of your expression is being observed, judged, and dissected. Your fine silks, your elaborate coiffure, the very way you disembark from the ship, all are part of a meticulously planned spectacle. You force a smile, a regal nod, trying to project the image of the perfect royal bride, while your stomach churns with a cocktail of anxiety and terror. You are acutely aware that this is your first formal introduction to your new people, your new court, and your new country. This isn't a welcome, it's an inspection. This is the overwhelming, often suffocating, truth of arrival and scrutiny, where every aspect of your public display was meticulously managed to impress and reassure, while beneath the glittering facade, a profound and isolating private fear consumed you, knowing your entire future hinged on these crucial first impressions. It's like performing a solo in a massive televised talent show where the entire audience comprises your in-laws and prospective employers. And failure means a diplomatic incident. The arrival of a royal bride in her new kingdom was far more than a simple landing. It was a carefully orchestrated diplomatic event, a grand public display designed to impress both the local populace and foreign observers. The procession from the port or border town to the capital, and then to the site of the wedding, could take weeks, involving a series of meticulously planned stops, receptions, and celebrations. Every detail was prearranged: the specific route, the towns where she would pause for formal welcomes, the dignitaries who would greet her, and even the attire she and her entourage would wear. This was a visual demonstration of the wealth and power of both the departing and receiving kingdoms. Imagine Princess Isabella's procession winding its way through the English countryside, accompanied by hundreds of her own French retinue and scores of newly assigned English escorts, their banners fluttering, their horses bedecked. Crowds would line the roads, eager to see their future queen. For them, it was a rare and exciting spectacle. A common historical truth is that the arrival of a royal princess in her new kingdom was a highly elaborate and publicly scrutinized event, involving formal processions and receptions designed to showcase diplomatic unity and the prestige of the incoming bride. These spectacles served as the initial public introduction of the future queen to her new subjects. Historians still widely debate the actual level of spontaneous public enthusiasm versus state-orchestrated attendance at these arrival ceremonies, as well as the immediate popular perception of foreign brides. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about this intense arrival and scrutiny and the performance of public display is the curious inclusion of physical vetting or chaperoned inspection, often performed by high-ranking noblewomen from the groom's court upon the bride's arrival, sometimes ostensibly to ensure her health and beauty, but implicitly to verify her physical suitability for childbearing and to dispel any rumors or concerns about her appearance or potential hidden infirmities, turning a welcoming gesture into a subtle, deeply invasive examination that magnified her private fear. Imagine Princess Isabella, after a tiring journey, being led into a private chamber. There, instead of simply resting, she is met by a stern-faced duchess and several older noblewomen who proceed to formally inspect her, perhaps checking her teeth, her hands, even her overall physique, under the guise of ensuring her well-being. This wasn't a doctor's visit. It was a deeply personal, almost objectifying appraisal of her physical assets for the purpose of dynastic procreation. It's like going to a job interview where, after your presentation, they physically examine you for fit and durability while your potential boss's relatives watch. The level of scrutiny placed upon the princess was immense. She was effectively on display from the moment she crossed the border. Every aspect of her appearance, her gown, her jewels, her hairstyle was observed for signs of taste, wealth, and national style. Her demeanor was watched for hints of pride, humility, intelligence, or weakness. Even her command of the local language, if she had learned it, as was expected, was tested during formal greetings. For Princess Isabella, every interaction with an English lord or lady, every public appearance was a subtle test. Did she carry herself with appropriate regal dignity? Was her smile sincere? Did she appear fertile and robust? These observations would quickly be relayed back to the king and the court, forming initial impressions that could profoundly impact her future standing. It truly sucked to be constantly evaluated, even on how you blinked. Beneath this glittering public display, the princess harbored a profound private fear. She was alone in a foreign land, surrounded by strangers, many of whom were probably suspicious of a foreign queen. She was leaving behind her entire support system, her family, her childhood friends, the familiar faces of her own court. The weight of her diplomatic mission rested heavily on her young shoulders. Failure to produce an heir, or to integrate successfully into her new court, could have catastrophic consequences, not just for her personal happiness, but for the alliance her marriage was meant to secure. Remember the chilling reality of the fateful betrothal from Chapter 1. Her life was a political instrument. This private fear was compounded by the intense anticipation of meeting her future husband, often for the very first time. What would he be like? Would he be kind? Would he find her attractive? Would he be demanding? The relationship with her husband was paramount. It would determine her daily life, her influence, and her ability to produce heirs. Imagine Princess Isabella after a long day of public receptions, lying awake in a foreign bed, in a strange castle, tormented by thoughts of the unknown man she was about to marry, the man who held her entire future in his hands. Moreover, the transfer of her retinue was a sensitive issue. While she would bring some of her own ladies-in-waiting, servants, and even advisors from her homeland, their numbers were often limited, and they too were subject to scrutiny and potential dismissal by the new court. This meant that even her closest confidants were vulnerable, adding another layer of anxiety to her already precarious position. She had to navigate the delicate balance of loyalty to her birth family while outwardly embracing her new country and its customs. The rituals of welcome were designed to be overwhelming, a continuous series of banquets, musical performances, and public appearances. While these were meant to be joyous for the princess, they were exhausting, relentless performances. There was little opportunity for genuine rest or quiet reflection. She was perpetually on stage, enduring hours of formal greetings, ceremonial dinners, and repetitive compliments, all while maintaining a facade of serene contentment. So, while the idea of a royal bride's arrival might seem like a grand, joyous entry, the stark reality of arrival and scrutiny, where every aspect of her public display masked a profound and isolating private fear, was a central ordeal of her pre-wedding experience. This era reminds us of the immense pressure placed on royal figures to embody national ideals and the intense public scrutiny that accompanied their every move, proving that for centuries, a princess's first impression was a high-stakes performance, leaving us truly grateful for modern privacy, the freedom from constant public judgment, and the ability to define our own initial appearances. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's terrifying first moments in her new kingdom, let's gently return from the intense arrival and scrutiny, where our royal princess faced the overwhelming public display and profound private fear of her introduction to a new kingdom. If we've just witnessed her public reception, tonight we'll delve into the grand, yet often impersonal, ceremonies that followed the feast and the formality. Rituals of union. You might imagine a joyous celebration, but for your royal ancestor, the feast and the formality were intricate rituals of union, a prolonged, exhausting performance designed to publicly cement the political alliance, masking any personal anxiety or sorrow. Imagine yourself. Now, Princess Isabella, having arrived at the English court, perhaps at the majestic palace of Westminster, around 1515. The days leading up to the wedding are a blur of preparations, fittings for elaborate gowns, and endless rehearsals of courtly bows and curtsies. Finally, the wedding day dawns. You are dressed in layers of heavy, jewel-encrusted fabric, your hair painstakingly arranged, a magnificent crown weighing heavily on your head. You process through throngs of nobles, courtiers, and foreign dignitaries. Your new husband, King Henry VIII, at your side, a man whose portrait you studied. Remember that anxiety from Chapter 1 and whose presence is both intimidating and utterly alien. The wedding ceremony itself, likely in Westminster Abbey, is a lengthy affair, conducted in Latin, a language you understand, but whose profound spiritual meaning feels distant amidst the political gravity of the moment. Then, the feast. It's not a relaxed dinner. It's a monumental spectacle of opulence and endless courses. A dazzling display of wealth and power. You sit at the high table, constantly observed, forced to maintain a serene smile, making polite conversation in a foreign tongue. Every dish, every toast, every piece of music is part of a grand performance designed to declare your union legitimate and fruitful. This is the exhausting, highly choreographed truth of the feast and the formality, where rituals of union were not about personal joy, but about public validation, an elaborate, prolonged spectacle that drained you physically and emotionally, even before the most intimate moment of your new life arrived. It's like being the guest of honor at an endless, mandatory corporate gala where you can't eat what you want, you can't leave, and everyone is judging your table manners. The medieval royal wedding was a series of meticulously choreographed events, each imbued with symbolic meaning, designed to publicly cement the union and, by extension, the political alliance it represented. These rituals of union were not merely social gatherings. They were vital acts of statecraft, witnessed by powerful nobles, foreign ambassadors, and often the common people, ensuring the legitimacy and public acceptance of the marriage. The wedding ceremony itself was often a grand affair, conducted with great pomp and circumstance. It would typically take place in a major cathedral or abbey, such as Westminster Abbey or Notre Dame, filled with the highest-ranking clergy, nobility, and representatives from various kingdoms. The vows were exchanged in Latin, reinforcing the church's blessing and the universal nature of the union. The exchange of rings, the blessing by the bishop, and the pronouncements of marriage were all deeply symbolic, legally binding the couple in the eyes of God and man. For the princess, this was the moment of no return, the final step in her transformation from a daughter of one kingdom to a consort of another. She was formally leaving her old life behind, embracing her new job as a queen. It truly sucked to make such a life-altering commitment when you barely knew your spouse. Following the solemnity of the ceremony came the joyous, at least outwardly, celebrations. Primarily the feast. Royal wedding feasts were legendary for their extravagance, a dazzling display of wealth, power, and culinary artistry. These banquets could last for hours, sometimes even days, with multiple courses, elaborate dishes, and copious amounts of wine and ale. Imagine tables groaning under the weight of roasted swans, peacocks reassembled with their feathers, massive meat pies filled with exotic spices, and intricate sugar sculptures depicting castles or mythical beasts. A common historical truth is that medieval royal wedding feasts were elaborate, multi-course banquets designed not just for celebration, but as grand public displays of wealth, power, and the diplomatic significance of the new union, often involving hundreds of guests and hours of formal dining. These feasts were a critical component of the rituals of union. Historians still widely debate the actual palatability of some of the more exotic or visually impressive medieval feast dishes. Given the differences in culinary techniques and ingredient availability compared to modern times, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the feast and the formality of these elaborate rituals of union is the curious and highly symbolic role of the trencher or bread plate used at royal feasts, which, rather than being merely a piece of crockery, was often a thick slice of stale bread that absorbed the juices and grease from the food, and was then, in a gesture of charity or social hierarchy, either consumed by a lower-ranking servant or given to the poor outside the palace gates, making the very plate a functional, edible symbol of the flow of resources from the royal table to the lower strata of society. Imagine Princess Isabella discreetly observing as her own trencher, once laden with delicacies, is whisked away by a servant after she's finished, destined for a hungry mouth in the palace kitchens, or perhaps even outside the gates. This wasn't just about waste management, it was a visible, tangible demonstration of the royal household's wealth and its customary role in providing for its dependents, even if only through discarded bread. It's like a medieval edible recycling program that also serves as a subtle display of charitable power. The seating arrangements at the feast were highly formal and strictly hierarchical. The royal couple would be seated at the high table, elevated above the other guests, underscoring their supreme status. Around them, arranged according to strict rules of precedence, would be the most important nobles, foreign ambassadors, and high-ranking clergy. For the princess, every moment at the high table was a performance. She had to maintain a regal bearing, engage in polite conversation often in her new language, as we discussed in Chapter 3, and eat with appropriate decorum, all while thousands of eyes watched her every move. This was not a relaxed meal with loved ones. It was an extension of her public display from Chapter 3, a continuation of her official duties. It truly sucked to be on display while trying to eat gracefully. Entertainment was an integral part of the feast. Minstrels would play music, jesters would perform, and sometimes even elaborate theatrical productions or jousting tournaments would be staged to entertain the guests. These entertainments added to the festive atmosphere, but also served to emphasize the grandeur and resources of the hosting monarch. Imagine Princess Isabella trying to follow a convoluted plot in a play performed entirely in English, while simultaneously being handed yet another rich, unfamiliar dish. Beyond the main feast, there were numerous other formalities and rituals. There might be a formal procession through the streets of the city, allowing the common people another chance to see their new queen. Gifts would be exchanged, often lavish and symbolic, further cementing the bond between the two royal houses. Dances would be held, requiring the princess to participate in the elaborate courtly dances of her new country, another opportunity for her grace and comportment to be judged. These were not just social graces. They were part of her job as a royal consort, expected behaviors that demonstrated her fitness for her new role. The sheer duration and intensity of these celebrations could be utterly exhausting. Weeks of travel remember the journey to the unknown in Chapter 2, days of public receptions, followed by hours of demanding ceremonies and feasts, would take a toll on anyone, let alone a young woman grappling with profound anxiety. The constant pressure to be perfect, to smile, to engage, to embody the ideal royal bride, left little room for genuine emotion or personal respite. Her personal feelings, her fears, her exhaustion, all had to be suppressed beneath a veneer of elegant composure. So, while the idea of a royal wedding feast might seem like a dream, the stark reality of the feast and the formality, where rituals of union were a prolonged, exhausting performance designed to publicly cement a political alliance, was a draining prelude to the most intimate moment of a princess's new life. This era reminds us of the profound public nature of royal lives and the relentless demands of statecraft, proving that for centuries, even the most joyous occasions were often arduous duties, leaving us truly grateful for modern wedding celebrations focused on personal connection, the freedom to enjoy our own private moments, and the ability to escape the public eye when needed, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's exhausting wedding day. Let's gently return from the dazzling yet draining world of the feast and the formality, where the rituals of union were a public spectacle of political alliance. If we've just witnessed the grand celebrations, tonight we'll delve into the most infamous and often horrifying medieval royal wedding tradition: the bedding ceremony, public ritual, private humiliation. You might imagine a private, intimate moment, but for your royal ancestor, the bedding ceremony was an intensely intrusive public ritual designed to ensure consummation, making it a profound and utterly agonizing private humiliation. Imagine yourself now. Princess Isabella, the young French princess, exhausted from days of travel, a brutal memory from Chapter 2, and endless celebrations, the draining feast and formality of Chapter 4. The grand wedding banquet is finally drawing to a close at the English court, perhaps in the king's newly built palace at Whitehall. The atmosphere, once jovial, takes on a strange, unsettling edge. Your ladies-in-waiting, normally a source of comfort, now look subtly uncomfortable. Suddenly, the music changes, or perhaps a master of ceremonies makes a formal announcement. A procession forms, not of revelers, but of solemn, high-ranking nobles, both men and women, led by the most senior figures, including perhaps your new husband's mother, or even his closest male confidants. They are not merely escorting you, they are leading you, almost ceremonially, to your bedchamber. The room is already prepared, and the bed magnificently adorned. But this is no sanctuary. The door remains open. More nobles. Perhaps even your new husband, King Henry VIII. Watch as your clothes, piece by agonizing piece, are removed by your ladies. You stand there, exposed, not just physically, but emotionally, before a room full of strangers. This isn't intimacy, it's an exhibition. This is the shocking, deeply invasive truth of the bedding ceremony, where a public ritual designed to guarantee heirs and validate the marriage became an unimaginable private humiliation, stripping a young woman of all dignity and privacy on what should have been her most personal night. It's like having a team of government inspectors and your entire extended family watch you perform a very delicate, very personal task, all to ensure you're doing it correctly for national security. The bedding ceremony was a long-standing tradition in royal and aristocratic circles across Europe, particularly prevalent in the medieval and early modern periods. Its primary purpose was unequivocally practical to provide public proof that the marriage was physically consummated, thereby ensuring its legal validity and, crucially, the legitimacy of any future heirs. in an era where dynastic succession was paramount and political stability often hinged on the clear lineage of a monarch. The act of consummation was far too important to be left to mere private assertion. The ceremony typically began after the wedding feast, often late into the night. The bride and groom would be formally escorted to their bedchamber by separate processions of nobles. The groom would be led by the most senior male courtiers, often jovially, sometimes with bawdy songs and jokes. The bride, on the other hand, was escorted by the most senior noblewomen of the court, frequently including her new mother-in-law or other powerful female relatives. This procession to the bedchamber was itself a part of the public ritual, with onlookers and courtiers gathering to witness the ceremonial walk. Once in the bedchamber, the full extent of the public ritual became apparent. The bride would be formally undressed by her ladies-in-waiting. Every layer of her elaborate wedding gown, her kirtle, her shifts, would be removed in the presence of the assembled witnesses. Similarly, the groom would be undressed by his male attendants. The air would be filled with a mix of hushed anticipation, nervous laughter, and often explicit jests about fertility and procreation. For the young princess, already exhausted and overwhelmed by the day's ceremonies, this public stripping was an intensely uncomfortable and profoundly humiliating experience. She was losing her last vestiges of privacy, becoming an object on display. It truly sucked to have absolutely no privacy on your wedding night. A common historical truth is that the bedding ceremony was a widespread royal and aristocratic custom in medieval and early modern Europe, where the newly married couple was formally escorted to their bedchamber and undressed in front of witnesses to signify the public expectation of consummation and legitimize future heirs. This ritual served as public proof of the marriage's validity. Historians still widely debate the precise variations of the bedding ceremony across different regions and time periods, as well as the extent to which actual intimacy was witnessed, versus merely the preparation for it. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the bedding ceremony and its deep roots in public ritual. Private humiliation is the curious, often crude, practice of showing the sheets the morning after, where witnesses, usually senior noblewomen, would inspect the marital bed linens for evidence of bloodstains, a stark and unambiguous proof of consummation and virginity lost, transforming the most intimate act into a literal, physical exhibit for public validation and ensuring the new queen's successful performance of her dynastic duty, amplifying her private humiliation to an excruciating public display. Imagine Princess Isabella, after a night of profound stress and awkwardness, waking to the knowledge that her most private act would be physically examined and announced. Her sheets, possibly stained with a small amount of blood evidence of defloration, would be formally presented to the witnesses, and later, the news would spread like wildfire through the court. This wasn't just about proof. It was a public declaration of her transition from maiden to wife, of her fulfilling her biological job to the crown. It's like having a very personal, very uncomfortable medical exam, but the results are broadcast on the evening news for national reassurance. Once the couple was undressed, they would be ceremonially placed into the bed. Sometimes, senior members of the nobility would tuck them in, offering blessings and sometimes ribald advice. The bed itself would often be adorned with rich fabrics, tapestries, and embroidered linens, making it a focal point of the ritual. For a brief period, the witnesses would remain in the room, making sure the couple was indeed in bed, before finally, and sometimes reluctantly, withdrawing. Their departure might be accompanied by further raucous jokes and well wishes for a fruitful night. The psychological impact of this private humiliation on a young princess, often a virgin and marrying a complete stranger, cannot be overstated. She was being thrust into the most intimate of situations under the glare of public expectation. Her modesty, privacy, and personal feelings were utterly disregarded. The atmosphere, while ostensibly celebratory, was also intensely intimidating. She knew that her entire future, and indeed the future of the alliance, hinged on her ability to perform her dynastic duty. The pressure to consummate the marriage and ultimately to conceive an heir began even before the door closed. This ritual highlighted the profound difference between royal marriage and that of commoners. For a peasant couple, their wedding night was a private affair, even if their lives were largely public, a harsh reality we explored in Chapter 1 about Born to the Soil. For a royal, even the most intimate act was a matter of state, subject to public scrutiny and verification. This constant lack of privacy was an omnipresent theme in royal life, but it reached its brutal zenith on the wedding night. The presence of witnesses, even if they eventually left, created an atmosphere of profound awkwardness and anxiety. The princess was aware that her physical reaction, her demeanor, and any signs of discomfort were being observed and would be discussed. This was not a setting conducive to genuine intimacy or emotional connection, particularly with a stranger. The act was stripped of any romantic notion, reduced to a biological imperative for dynastic succession. So, while the idea of a royal wedding might evoke images of joyous celebration, the grim reality of the bedding ceremony, where a public ritual became a profound, private humiliation, was a central, agonizing ordeal for a royal princess. This era reminds us of the extreme lack of personal autonomy and the dehumanizing pressures placed on royal women to fulfill their dynastic duties, proving that for centuries, the path to a crown was paved with deeply personal sacrifices, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of privacy, the right to personal boundaries, and the freedom to define our own intimate moments. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's humiliating wedding night, let's gently return from the excruciating reality of the bedding ceremony, where a public ritual culminated in profound, private humiliation for our young royal bride. If we've just witnessed the stripping away of her privacy, tonight we'll delve into the tense, often profoundly awkward, hours that followed the royal chamber, intimacy under pressure. You might imagine a serene, romantic setting, but for your royal ancestor, the royal chamber became a crucible of intimacy under pressure, a fraught space where duty trumped desire, and the expectations of an entire kingdom weighed heavily on a deeply personal, yet utterly public act. Imagine yourself now, Princess Isabella, lying in the magnificent bed within the royal chamber of Whitehall Palace, the heavy velvet hangings pulled around you, but offering little comfort or true seclusion. The last of the attendants have finally, mercifully, left. Though you are keenly aware that they are likely just outside the door, ready to re-enter at a moment's notice to certify the job has been done. Beside you, perhaps for the very first time with any true privacy, is King Henry VIII, your new husband. He is a stranger. You might have seen his portrait, that carefully curated image from Chapter 1, and you've endured the public spectacle of his presence throughout the wedding ceremonies, the exhausting feast and formality of Chapter 4. But now, alone with him, the reality of your situation crashes down. The air is thick with unspoken expectations, the weight of dynasties, the desperate need for an heir. There's no soft music, no tender words of affection. This isn't a moment of burgeoning love. It's a cold, hard test, a fulfillment of a contract that involves your body, your fertility, and the future of two kingdoms. Every breath feels heavy with the pressure. This is the profound, terrifying truth of the royal chamber, where intimacy under pressure transformed what should have been a personal act into a monumental dynastic obligation, devoid of genuine connection, leaving you utterly vulnerable and profoundly alone, even with your husband beside you. It's like being forced into a very high-stakes, very awkward, very public job interview where your physical performance determines the fate of entire nations. Once the last witness had departed the bedchamber, a strange, heavy silence would often descend. The opulence of the room, with its rich tapestries, heavy furniture, and grand fireplace, offered little warmth in the face of the profound awkwardness and anxiety that permeated the air. For the young princess, likely a virgin and still reeling from the private humiliation of the bedding ceremony, Chapter 5. The presence of her new husband, often a much older man and a complete stranger, was terrifying. The concept of intimacy in this context was entirely divorced from modern notions of mutual desire or affection. This was a purely functional act, a dynastic obligation. The king's primary goal was to secure his line, and the queen's primary job was to produce heirs, especially a male heir. Failure to do so could have devastating consequences, not just for the queen personally, but for the stability of the kingdom. This immense pressure hung over the royal couple, making their first encounter a crucible of anxiety rather than a moment of personal connection. A common historical truth is that the intimacy of a royal wedding night was primarily driven by dynastic obligation and the immediate need to produce legitimate heirs, rather than personal affection or mutual desire. The act of consummation was a crucial legal and political requirement for the validity of the marriage and the legitimacy of any future children. Historians still widely debate the extent to which royal couples might have found personal connection or even affection over time. Despite the constraints of their arranged marriages and the initial pressures of the wedding night, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the royal chamber and the crushing weight of intimacy under pressure is the curious and almost absurd practice of blessed fertility objects or symbolic tokens, sometimes placed within the royal bedchamber by attendants just before the couple was left alone. Perhaps a small statue of a fertile goddess, a sprig of a plant believed to enhance conception, or even a specific prayer recited over the bed, reflecting the desperate and superstitious hope for immediate and abundant offspring, transforming the intimate space into a kind of pagan fertility shrine. Imagine Princess Isabella lying rigid in the vast bed, noticing a strangely carved wooden fertility charm, perhaps a small, unblinking idol, or a cluster of dried herbs, strategically placed on a nearby table or even tucked under her pillow by her well-meaning, yet intrusive, ladies-in-waiting. This wasn't about romance. It was about every possible avenue, magical or otherwise, being explored to ensure the job got done, and done quickly. It's like setting up a complex, mystical Rube Goldberg machine just to make sure two people really want to do something that they might not want to do at all. For the king, too, there was pressure. He needed to prove his virility and his ability to sire heirs. His reputation, and the perceived strength of his kingdom, were tied to his capacity to produce a robust succession. While he had more agency than the queen, the act was still a performance of duty, not necessarily one of pleasure, particularly if his new bride was very young, timid, or unattractive to him. The lack of privacy extended even to this supposedly intimate moment. While the witnesses had left the room, they were usually just outside, waiting for a signal, or for the morning to verify the consummation. The expectation of proof, often in the form of a bloodied sheet, a grim callback to the showing the sheets tradition from Chapter 5, meant that the act itself was not truly private. The couple knew they would be checked in the morning, making the pressure to perform even greater. Imagine the suffocating feeling of knowing that the very outcome of your night would be publicly examined before dawn. Furthermore, communication between the royal couple might have been difficult. If the princess was still struggling with the new language, or if the king spoke a different dialect, even basic communication could be strained. Add to this the formality of royal interactions, where even between spouses a certain decorum was expected, and genuine conversation, let alone emotional connection, might have been impossible. They were, after all, strangers bound by a political contract. The physical act itself, particularly for a young, inexperienced virgin, could be painful and frightening. Without consent, comfort, or emotional connection, it was merely a physical ordeal to be endured. The queen's job was to submit and to conceive. Her feelings, her comfort, her fear, were secondary to the dynastic imperative. The cold reality of consummation's crucible was already beginning to shape her experience, making the act a necessary, if traumatic, step towards fulfilling her duty. The morning after was often just as ritualized as the bedding ceremony itself. Attendants would re-enter the chamber, sometimes with great fanfare, and the infamous inspection of the sheets would take place, a truly cringe-inducing tradition from Chapter 5. This public display of proof was the final validation of the marriage, a crucial moment for the court and the kingdom. For the princess, it was the end of one ordeal and the beginning of another, the lifelong job of a royal consort, with the constant pressure to conceive and bear children, particularly sons. So, while the idea of a royal wedding night might evoke images of romance and private bliss, the grim reality of the royal chamber, where intimacy under pressure transformed a personal act into a dynastic obligation, was a terrifying ordeal for a royal princess. This era reminds us of the extreme subjugation of personal agency to the demands of state and succession, proving that for centuries, even the most intimate moments were dictated by political necessity, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of marital consent, personal privacy, and the freedom to define our own intimate relationships. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's miserable wedding night, let's gently return from the suffocating reality of the royal chamber, where intimacy under pressure transformed a personal act into a dynastic obligation for our royal princess. If we've just explored the terrifying first night, tonight we'll delve into the cold, hard biological imperative that lay at its heart. Consummation's crucible, duty over desire. You might imagine a union of souls, but for your royal ancestor, consummation's crucible was a stark test of fertility and obedience, where duty over desire was not merely a polite suggestion, but an absolute, non-negotiable command that shaped her entire future. Imagine yourself now. Princess Isabella, having survived the ordeal of the wedding night with King Henry VIII. The morning after, remember that excruciating showing the sheets ritual from Chapter 5 has confirmed the physical act has taken place, at least in the eyes of the court. But the pressure doesn't end there. In fact, it has only just begun. Your job as a queen now shifts from merely being married to being fruitful. Every month, the court, your husband, and indeed, you yourself, will anxiously await signs of pregnancy. Whispers will follow you if you don't conceive quickly. Remedies, superstitions, and even intrusive medical examinations might be brought to bear if a pregnancy doesn't manifest. You are not just a woman, you are a living vessel, a royal incubator whose sole, paramount purpose is to produce an heir, preferably a son, to secure the future of the kingdom. Your personal feelings, your comfort, your desires, they are utterly irrelevant. Your body is no longer your own. It belongs to the state, to the lineage. This is the relentless, unforgiving truth of consummation's crucible, where duty over desire was the defining principle of your existence as a royal wife, turning every intimate moment into a terrifying assessment of your biological utility, a stark reminder of the impersonal nature of your royal job. It's like being a very expensive, very public breeding animal for a critical national project, and your performance is constantly being evaluated for quarterly reports and dynastic stability. The act of consummation on the royal wedding night was not merely a cultural tradition. It was a critical legal and theological requirement for the validity of a marriage in the eyes of the church and the law. Without physical union, a marriage could potentially be annulled, leading to catastrophic political and dynastic instability. This made the wedding night the ultimate crucible, a severe test of the marriage's legitimacy and the princess's ability to fulfill her primary job as a royal wife, for the princess, and indeed for the king. The pressure was immense. The immediate goal was clear: to produce a legitimate heir, and the sooner, the better. A quick pregnancy, especially leading to the birth of a healthy male child, was the ultimate validation of the marriage and a source of immense relief for both families and the kingdom. Conversely, a delay in conception, or the birth of only daughters, could plunge the royal couple, and indeed the entire court, into a state of anxiety and political uncertainty. A common historical truth is that the consummation of a royal marriage was not just a private act, but a vital legal and dynastic requirement, essential for proving the marriage's validity and, crucially, for ensuring the legitimacy of future heirs. The pressure on royal couples, particularly the queen, to conceive quickly was immense as succession was paramount to political stability. Historians still widely debate the long-term emotional and physical toll of this intense reproductive pressure on royal consorts throughout their lives. Given the limited personal accounts available, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about consummation's crucible and the absolute demand for duty over desire is the curious prevalence of fertility rituals and procreation talismans, brought into the royal bedchamber or even physically pressed upon the royal couple by hopeful attendants and superstitious courtiers, sometimes involving bizarre concoctions, dried animal parts, or charms blessed by local folk healers, reflecting the desperate lengths to which medieval society would go to ensure conception. Viewing fertility not just as a biological process, but as something influenced by a blend of divine will, magic, and earthly intervention. Imagine Princess Isabella trying to sleep, while a well-meaning but intrusive older duchess places a small, oddly shaped stone, rumored to enhance fertility, under her pillow, or insists on a particular herbal tea known for its purported reproductive benefits. This wasn't about personal comfort. It was about leaving no stone unturned in the dynastic quest for an heir, even if it meant embracing the bizarre and the unscientific, turning the intimate space into a functional, if somewhat odd, fertility clinic. It's like a very personal, very uncomfortable science experiment. But the scientists are your in-laws and the whole court, and their methods range from basic biology to utter nonsense. The medieval worldview placed a heavy emphasis on divine will in matters of fertility. Conception was seen as a blessing from God, and barrenness could be interpreted as divine displeasure. This religious overlay added another layer of immense pressure on the royal couple. Prayers, pilgrimages, and offerings to saints known for aiding fertility were common practices. For the queen, every menstrual cycle that did not result in pregnancy was a source of private despair and public anxiety, a testament to her failure to perform her most vital job. The lack of personal desire in the act was often a given. As we've seen, remember the intimacy under pressure from Chapter 6. The princess was often marrying a stranger, sometimes a much older man, or someone she found unattractive. Her feelings were irrelevant. The act was purely a function of her role. She was expected to submit to her husband's advances without complaint, for the sake of the kingdom. This expectation stripped the act of any romance or personal agency, reducing it to a cold, biological transaction. It truly sucked to have your body used purely for political ends. Furthermore, the pressure to produce a male heir was paramount. While daughters could be valuable for future alliances, a male heir was essential for the continuation of the dynasty and the stability of the throne. The Wars of the Roses in England, for example, were a brutal illustration of what could happen when the male line of succession was weak or contested. This historical context intensified the demand for sons, placing an even heavier burden on the queen. If she produced only daughters, the pressure on her to keep trying, or even the possibility of her being set aside for a new queen, became a terrifying prospect. The private life of the royal couple, particularly their reproductive efforts, condemned what was never truly private. Courtiers, physicians, and even servants would keenly observe any signs of pregnancy, and news would spread rapidly. The queen's health, her diet, her activities, everything might be regulated to promote conception. Imagine Princess Isabella, constantly watched for any change in her figure, her appetite, or her morning sickness. Every cough or sigh potentially misinterpreted as a symptom of pregnancy, or worse, a sign of her reproductive failure. The king, too, might face pressure if an heir was slow to come. Whispers about his virility or even his capability to rule might circulate. However, it was almost always the queen who bore the brunt of the blame for a lack of heirs. She was the one whose body was the vessel, and her perceived barrenness could lead to her being divorced, sent to a convent, or even executed, as happened to some unfortunate queens throughout history. Her life, her future, her very survival, hinged on her ability to succeed in this most fundamental of jobs, So, while the idea of a royal marriage might seem to culminate in romance, the stark reality of consummation's crucible, where duty over desire was the absolute command for a royal princess, was a lifelong ordeal. This era reminds us of the extreme pressures placed on royal women to fulfill their dynastic obligations, proving that for centuries, a queen's value was often measured by her fertility, leaving us truly grateful for modern reproductive freedom, the right to bodily autonomy, and the ability to define our own worth beyond biological function. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's relentless pursuit of an heir, let's gently return from the intense, unyielding pressure of consummation's crucible, where duty over desire dictated the very purpose of a royal princess's intimate life. If we've just explored the immediate aftermath of her wedding night, tonight we'll delve into the tense scrutiny of the day that followed the morning after. Scrutiny and speculation. You might imagine a moment of blissful quiet, but for your royal ancestor, the morning after was a relentless period of scrutiny and speculation, where proof of her fulfilled duty was demanded, and every gesture and every whisper fueled intense court gossip. Imagine yourself now, Princess Isabella, having spent a night that was more obligation than intimacy with King Henry VIII. The first rays of dawn filter through the heavy curtains of your magnificent bedchamber. You are utterly exhausted, emotionally drained, and physically uncomfortable. But there is no time for quiet reflection or rest. The moment the first hints of light appear, the chamber doors are likely to open again. Your ladies-in-waiting, followed by senior noblewomen of the court, perhaps even the Queen Mother or other powerful female relatives will re-enter. Their purpose is clear: to visually confirm that the marriage has been consummated. The infamous showing the sheets ritual, a grim, intrusive callback to Chapter 5, might now take place, where evidence of your virginity lost is literally presented for inspection. You are expected to appear composed, perhaps even radiant. Despite the profound awkwardness and the complete violation of your privacy, every facial expression, every subtle shift in your posture, every word you utter or fail to utter will be observed. Whispers will begin immediately, spreading like wildfire through the court. Was the king pleased? Did she seem happy? Did she fulfill her duty? This is the immediate, relentless, and deeply invasive truth of the morning after, where scrutiny and speculation replaced any hope of privacy or rest, transforming your most personal night into a public report card. With your reputation and the kingdom's future hanging precariously in the balance, it's like enduring a highly public, very personal final exam, where the entire student body and faculty are dissecting your performance immediately afterwards, and your grade determines national policy. For a royal princess, there was no gentle transition from the wedding night into private marital bliss. The morning after was often just as ritualized and publicly scrutinized as the wedding ceremony itself. The entire court held its breath, awaiting news of the consummation. For the validity of the marriage and the legitimacy of future heirs, the paramount importance of which we stressed in Chapter 7 depended entirely upon it. The immediate arrival of female attendants, often led by the most senior and influential women of the court, was a standard practice. Their job was not just to help the new queen dress or to bring her breakfast, it was to subtly, or sometimes overtly, assess the situation. Were there signs of a struggle? Did the queen appear upset or relieved? Was there any indication that the act of consummation had, in fact, taken place? Every detail was noted and then inevitably discussed. A common historical truth is that the morning after a royal wedding was a period of intense scrutiny, particularly for the new queen, with various rituals and informal observations made by court attendants to ascertain that the marriage had been physically consummated. This public verification was crucial for validating the union and ensuring the legitimacy of any future royal offspring. Historians still widely debate the actual level of physical inspection that occurred in these moments and how widely details of the consummation were explicitly shared beyond the most inner court circles. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about the morning after And the pervasive scrutiny and speculation is the curious ritual of the morning gift, or Morgengabe. A substantial gift of land, jewels, or wealth traditionally bestowed by the groom upon his bride the morning after the wedding, often presented publicly by a trusted courtier, which served as both a tangible reward for her performance and a very public declaration of the marriage's official consummation and the groom's satisfaction, transforming a personal expression of generosity into a high-stakes public announcement of dynastic success. Imagine Princess Isabella, still reeling from the events of the night, being presented with a magnificent jewel casket or a document granting her vast new estates. Not by her husband in private, but by a solemn-faced royal official in front of a bustling chamber full of courtiers. This wasn't just a wedding present, it was a public trophy. A silent but unmistakable message to the entire court, and beyond that, the job was done, and done successfully. It's like getting a huge bonus check after a demanding project, but the check is publicly delivered by a team of auditors, and everyone knows exactly what you had to do to earn it. The most infamous and arguably most humiliating aspect of this morning scrutiny was the showing of the sheets. While not universally practiced with explicit public display, the inspection of the marital linens for evidence of bloodstains was a common reality in many royal courts. This served as undeniable physical proof of defloration and, therefore, consummation. For Princess Isabella, the thought that her most intimate act would be reduced to a stained piece of linen, presented for confirmation, was profoundly degrading. It stripped away any semblance of romance or personal dignity from the experience. It truly sucked to have your most private moments documented like a police report. Beyond the physical evidence, there was the subtle, constant speculation that permeated the court. Courtiers were eager for any scrap of information about the royal couple's first night. Was the king happy with his new queen? Did she seem amiable? Did she display the expected signs of modesty and obedience? Every interaction, every fleeting glance between the royal pair would be analyzed and dissected. Gossip would spread rapidly, influencing opinions and potentially shaping the queen's future standing at court. A king's perceived satisfaction with his new bride could bolster her position, while any hint of dissatisfaction could quickly lead to rumors and a precarious future. For the princess, navigating this immediate aftermath required immense self-control and a carefully constructed persona, a continuing theme from Chapter 1. Despite her exhaustion and any emotional distress, she had to present an image of serene contentment, regal dignity, and cheerful acquiescence to her new role. Any sign of unhappiness or reluctance could be interpreted as weakness, or worse, as a diplomatic slight. This relentless performance, even in the presumed privacy of her own bedchamber, was a heavy burden. The king, too, was under scrutiny. His public demeanor on the morning after also signaled his satisfaction or otherwise. His interactions with his new queen, his mood, his general comportment, all were observed. A king who appeared displeased or distant could trigger concerns about the marriage's success and the stability of the alliance. However, the ultimate blame for any perceived issues with consummation or future fertility almost always fell upon the queen. This constant public observation meant that the royal couple never truly had a private life, even in the moments immediately following their wedding. The demands of dynastic succession and political stability overshadowed any personal needs or desires. Their job as royal figures was a 24/7 role, with every aspect of their existence, even the most intimate, serving a larger political purpose. The transition from maiden to wife, from one kingdom to another, was marked by relentless visibility and ceaseless expectation. So, while the idea of the morning after a wedding might suggest quiet relief, the grim reality of the morning after, where scrutiny and speculation replaced any hope of privacy or rest for a royal princess, was a relentless continuation of her ordeal. This era reminds us of the profound lack of personal space and the intense public pressure that defined royal lives, proving that for centuries, even the most private moments were subject to validation by the state. leaving us truly grateful for modern privacy, the freedom from constant public judgment, and the right to define our own post-nuptial experiences, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's deeply scrutinized morning after. Let's gently return from the intense scrutiny of the morning after, where scrutiny and speculation replaced any hope of privacy for our royal princess. If we've just witnessed the immediate aftermath of her wedding night, tonight we'll delve into the demanding, often unfulfilling, reality of her new permanent job, life's new reality, a crowned cage. You might imagine a life of endless luxury and power, but for your royal ancestor, life's new reality as a queen or duchess was often lived within a crowned cage, a gilded prison of relentless duties, constant observation, and the supreme, inescapable demand for heirs. Imagine yourself now. Princess Isabella, having formally become Queen Isabella of England, a few weeks or months after your wedding to King Henry VIII, the initial intensity of the ceremonies and the wedding night has faded, but it has been replaced by a new, relentless rhythm of duties. You wake each morning in a grand, often cold, bedchamber, knowing your day is entirely prescribed. You attend daily mass, perhaps in a lavish royal chapel. Then come the endless formal meetings receiving ambassadors, listening to petitions, perhaps overseeing your household staff. You are expected to always be impeccably dressed, always gracious, always composed, embodying the perfect image of a queen. Your ladies-in-waiting, a consistent feature of serving the nobility from Chapter 6, are constantly with you, attending to your needs, but also subtly observing your every move, and reporting back to the more powerful factions of the court. You eat formal meals, often alone or with only your immediate household, but always under the watchful eye of servants and courtiers. You spend hours on womanly pursuits like embroidery or playing a lute, but even these are often performed in public, or for a specific political purpose. And beneath it all, the omnipresent pressure to conceive, to produce that longed-for male heir, hangs over you like a perpetual storm cloud, a direct continuation of the anxiety from consummation's crucible in Chapter 7. You are queen. Yes, but your every moment is dictated, your every choice constrained, your very body a tool of the state. This is the enduring, often suffocating, truth of life's new reality, where your job as a royal wife transformed your gilded existence into a crowned cage, a life of constant performance, relentless duty, and profound personal sacrifice, far removed from any notion of personal freedom or self-determination. It's like getting promoted to CEO of a global corporation. But your office is a glass box. Your every move is live-streamed, and your only job security depends on you producing a perfect successor by next year. For a royal princess who became a queen or duchess, her new reality was one of immense status. Certainly, but also profound constraint. Her life was no longer her own. It was entirely dedicated to the service of her new kingdom and dynasty. This was her lifelong job, and it was multifaceted, demanding, and often isolating. One of the primary and most immediate jobs of a new queen was managing her own household. A queen's household was a massive, complex entity, a miniature court within the larger royal court, often numbering hundreds of servants. Ladies-in-waiting, chaplains, and officials remember those vast networks of serving the nobility from Chapter 6. The queen was responsible for its daily operation, from provisioning and finances to ensuring proper etiquette and discipline. This required considerable administrative skill and attention to detail. Imagine Queen Isabella overseeing the purchase of vast quantities of food, supervising her chief lady-in-waiting, and arbitrating disputes among her staff, all while maintaining a regal composure. A common historical truth is that a royal queen's primary job extended far beyond being a wife, encompassing the rigorous management of her own extensive household, which functioned as a complex administrative entity requiring significant organizational and financial oversight. This role was crucial to the social and logistical functioning of the court. Historians still widely debate the precise level of genuine autonomy and decision-making power queens exercised over their households. Given their reliance on male officials and the overarching authority of the king, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about life's new reality and the omnipresent nature of a crowned cage is the curious and often strategic role of the Chamber of Accounts, or privy purse, managed directly by the Queen's chief ladies, which, while ostensibly dealing with her personal expenditures, also became a vital hub for informal political influence, enabling discreet charitable donations, subtle gift-giving to favored courtiers, or even the quiet funding of intelligence networks, allowing the Queen to wield a degree of power outside the formal, male-dominated structures of the court, turning her personal finances into a quiet engine of influence within her gilded cage. Imagine Queen Isabella meeting secretly with her chief lady, reviewing expenses from her privy purse not just for new gowns, but perhaps for a significant donation to a monastery favored by a key noble, or a quiet stipend to a lesser courtier who provides her with useful information. This wasn't about lavish spending, it was about cultivating a network of loyalty and gratitude, a subtle form of power distinct from her husband's authority, often her only true means of influencing the impenetrable political landscape. It's like having a secret slush fund for your personal PR and lobbying efforts, but every expense is scrutinized by the highest powers, and the entire goal is to simply survive. Beyond household management, the Queen's most critical job was, as we've constantly emphasized, producing heirs. This was the ultimate measure of her success and her primary contribution to the dynasty. Every pregnancy, every birth, every miscarriage or stillbirth, a tragic reality in medieval times, often due to sickness on the seas affecting populations in general. As discussed in Chapter 5, was a matter of intense public and private concern. The Queen's body became a vessel for the future of the kingdom, her reproductive health relentlessly monitored and discussed. If she struggled to conceive or only produced daughters, the pressure on her, and the whispers about her potential replacement, would intensify. This constant burden, this consummation's crucible from Chapter 7, never truly left her. It truly sucked to have your entire worth tied to your uterus. The Queen also had significant ceremonial duties. She presided over court events, attended state dinners, and participated in religious ceremonies. She was expected to be a gracious hostess, a pious exemplar, and a visible symbol of her husband's power and prestige. This meant endless hours of public appearances, maintaining a regal composure regardless of her personal feelings or fatigue. Every gown she wore, every jewel she displayed, was part of a larger message of royal majesty. Political influence, while often informal and indirect, was another aspect of her job. A wise and ambitious queen could become a trusted advisor to her husband, offering counsel on state matters, mediating disputes, or promoting certain factions at court. Her private chambers could become a hub of political intrigue, with courtiers vying for her favor to gain access to the king. However, this influence was always precarious, dependent on her husband's trust and her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics without overstepping her boundaries. A queen who became too powerful or too overtly political risked alienating her husband or provoking the jealousy of powerful nobles. The crowned cage aspect of her life was palpable. While surrounded by luxury, she lived in a constant state of surveillance. Her ladies-in-waiting, while ostensibly her companions, were also her keepers. Their loyalty often divided between the queen and the king, or other powerful factions. Her movements were restricted, her correspondence monitored, and her personal life virtually non-existent. She could not simply leave the court for a holiday or visit her family without formal permission, and often a significant state purpose. Her very existence was a public property, leaving little room for genuine personal freedom or privacy. Remember the pervasive squalor and filth that could even permeate royal residences, as hinted in previous chapters, meaning even the luxury had its hidden discomforts. Finally, The queen's job involved raising royal children, especially the heir. This was a complex task, often involving a large retinue of nurses, governesses, and tutors. While she might not have been involved in every aspect of their daily care, she was responsible for their moral upbringing, their education, and ensuring they were prepared for their future roles. This was another way she directly contributed to the stability and future of the dynasty. So, while the idea of a queen's life might evoke images of unchallenged power and endless luxury, the stark reality of life's new reality, where her existence was a demanding, often unfulfilling job within a crowned cage, was a persistent truth. This era reminds us of the profound personal sacrifices demanded of royal women for the sake of dynastic continuity and state stability, proving that for centuries, a crown often came at the cost of personal freedom, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of personal autonomy, the ability to choose our own paths, and the freedom from constant public scrutiny. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's lifelong job in her gilded prison, let's gently return from the gilded confines of life's new reality, where a crowned cage defined the demanding existence of our royal princess as a queen. If we've just explored her relentless duties and lack of personal freedom, tonight we'll conclude our journey by reflecting on the profound, often tragic, meaning of her entire life legacy and longing, power and loneliness. You might imagine a life celebrated for its achievements, but for your royal ancestor, her legacy and longing were often intertwined with immense power and loneliness, a poignant testament to the human cost hidden beneath the glittering facade of dynastic success. Imagine yourself now, Queen Isabella. Perhaps in your later years, having lived through decades as Queen of England, you have perhaps endured multiple pregnancies, some successful, some ending in heartbreak. You might have seen children grow, some thrive, others succumb to the pervasive sickness on the seas, a brutal reality that affected all medieval life. As recalled from Chapter 5, you have navigated the treacherous currents of court intrigue, made powerful allies, and perhaps even more powerful enemies. Your political influence may have waxed and waned, dependent on your husband's favor and the birth of a male heir. You look back at a life where personal desires were almost always subservient to dynastic demands, where love was a luxury rarely afforded, and where true privacy was an impossible dream. You fulfilled your job. You produced heirs. You managed your household. You upheld the honor of your adopted kingdom. You wielded immense power, certainly, but you also experienced profound loneliness. The isolation of your position, the constant scrutiny, the lack of true confidants who weren't also spies or opportunists. The absence of genuinely shared intimacy, a stark echo from the royal chamber in Chapter 6. These were the silent burdens of your crown. You are a symbol, a queen, a mother of future kings. But beneath it all, you are a woman who yearned for connection, for autonomy, for a life that was truly her own. This is the enduring, bittersweet truth of legacy and longing, where power and loneliness became two sides of the same royal coin, a profound and poignant culmination of a life lived as a political instrument, far from the simple joys or chosen paths of ordinary folk. It's like reaching the absolute pinnacle of corporate success, but realizing you've sacrificed every personal relationship, every genuine desire, and your entire sense of self to get there. The legacy of a royal princess, once she became a queen, was multifaceted. Her most paramount contribution, and the one for which she would be most remembered or criticized, was her ability to provide legitimate heirs to the throne. If she produced a strong, healthy male heir, especially one who survived to adulthood, her legacy was secured. She had fulfilled her job, cementing the dynasty and ensuring political stability. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine, who produced numerous children for two kings, or Elizabeth of York, who united the houses of Lancaster and York through her offspring, are remembered for their crucial roles in dynastic continuity. Their bodies, their fertility, were the ultimate tools of statecraft, and their success in this job shaped centuries of history. However, a queen's legacy was also shaped by her political influence. While often indirect, a queen could, through her counsel, her charm, or her strategic alliances at court, remember her Chamber of Accounts from Chapter 9, profoundly impact governance. She might advocate for certain policies, promote favored individuals, or even, in the absence of her husband, rule as a regent. Queens like Isabella of France, mother of Edward III, or Catherine de' Medici, wielded immense power, often through sheer force of will and political acumen. Their impact extended far beyond the birthing chamber, leaving a mark on the political landscape of their times. A common historical truth is that the legacy of a royal queen was predominantly defined by her success in producing legitimate heirs, especially male, and her capacity to exert political influence, directly or indirectly, within the court. These contributions were paramount to dynastic stability and state affairs, far outweighing personal accomplishments or happiness. Historians still widely debate the true extent of individual queens' political power and agency, particularly those who were not regents, given the male-dominated structures of medieval and early modern courts. A fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about legacy and longing and the inherent contradiction of power and loneliness in a queen's life is the curious phenomenon of proxy friendships or diplomatic pen pals, where queens from different nations, bound by similar political marriages and strict court protocols, would sometimes engage in extensive, often surprisingly candid, letter-writing campaigns, using coded language and trusted couriers to share advice, offer emotional support, or even exchange subtle political intelligence, creating rare, genuine connections that temporarily pierce the veil of their isolation, transforming diplomatic necessity into a quiet, crucial lifeline against overwhelming loneliness. Imagine Queen Isabella, late at night, painstakingly composing a letter to another queen, perhaps in Spain or the Holy Roman Empire, a woman she has never met in person, but who understands the unique pressures of a crowned cage, a poignant reminder from Chapter 9, better than anyone else in her own court. These letters, ostensibly about trivial matters, often contained deeper, veiled expressions of frustration, loneliness, or subtle political insights, offering a rare sanctuary of shared understanding for two women trapped by their crowns. It's like having a very exclusive, very high stakes, very secret international support group chat, but it's done via handwritten, encrypted letters that take months to arrive. Despite the immense power she might wield, the queen's life was often marked by profound loneliness. Her position was inherently isolated. She was often a foreigner in her new land, separated from her birth family and culture, a continuous thread from her journey to the unknown in Chapter 2. While surrounded by courtiers and attendants, genuine friendships were rare, as many were vying for favor, and few could be truly trusted with her innermost thoughts. Her relationship with her husband, the king, while perhaps growing into affection over time, was always tinged with the political imperative of their union and the ultimate threat of his displeasure. The very public nature of her life, the constant scrutiny and speculation a relentless burden from Chapter 8, meant that privacy, and therefore true intimacy, was almost impossible to achieve. Her personal job was never off the clock, never truly separate from her public persona. It truly sucked to be surrounded by people and yet feel utterly alone. The longing for personal freedom, for genuine connection, for a life lived on her own terms, must have been a constant, quiet ache for many queens. They were denied the simple joys of private life, the freedom to choose their companions, their homes, or even their daily activities. Their elaborate gowns and magnificent palaces often felt like parts of a costume, elements of the crowned cage that defined their existence. This longing was rarely articulated openly, for to do so would be to show weakness or ingratitude. But it was a pervasive undercurrent in the lives of many royal women. The legacy of a royal queen also extended to her patronage of arts, architecture, and learning. Many queens were significant patrons, funding cathedrals, commissioning illuminated manuscripts, supporting poets and musicians, or establishing schools and charitable institutions. This demonstrated their piety, their cultural sophistication, and their contribution to the flourishing of the kingdom. These were ways they could exert influence and leave a lasting mark that went beyond mere procreation. Ultimately, the life of a royal princess, from her preordained, fateful betrothal, Chapter 1 to her final days as queen, was a testament to the profound sacrifices demanded by the medieval and early modern political landscape. Her miserable wedding night was merely the shocking entry point into a life where personal autonomy was systematically stripped away, replaced by the relentless demands of dynastic survival. Her body was a tool, her emotions a liability, and her private life a public concern. She wielded immense power, but at a cost that often led to profound loneliness and an enduring longing for a different, simpler existence. So, as we conclude our deep dive into the miserable wedding night of a royal princess, and reflect on the pervasive themes of legacy and longing, power and loneliness, we are reminded of the profound human cost hidden beneath the glittering facade of royalty. This era serves as a stark reminder that even those at the apex of society faced unimaginable pressures and profound personal sacrifices, proving that for centuries, crowns were often heavy burdens, weighing down the individuals who wore them with duty, expectation, and isolation. It leaves us truly grateful for the modern freedoms we often take for granted: the right to choose our partners, to marry for love, to cherish our privacy, and to forge our own destinies. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a royal princess's life. Lived for the state, but often, tragically, alone.